Greetings, 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 greetings. You are now tuned into the vault. Trust, Christian, own nothing, control everything. Just want to thank you for tuning in live, listening to replay. This is the vault, episode 460. What state is the best to open a LLC? Definitely want to do this episode. We've done things possibly similar to this, but not exact. So this is one of those questions that have been asked to the vault for many years. We're going to do our best to go through quite a few of the states that most people will consider sufficient. This is not legal advice or financial advice, so we've already prefaced that by letting people know that it's not legal advice or financial advice. So when we do talk about these things, they are for objective opinion for you to go and research them yourselves, see the advantages and disadvantages of particular jurisdictions when we look across the board. So we're going to just go ahead and run through what you would consider the best state. This is something that's been asked us for many years now, long standing. So, of course, there's never an easy answer for this. There's no one answer fits all, but we are going to address it um, because it is something that, for years everyone asked the question, well, what is the best state to open an LLC or whether it's a C Corp or any of that nature. So we're going to talk about it from the perspective of we have seen best case scenarios. We can point out examples to you all. Why our particular corporation set up in, we'll just start out in one of the old glory states, one of the more old pioneering states of corporatocracy, which is Delaware. So this isn't an indictment on any state in particular. This is literally just a conversation of to the general public, traditionally entrepreneurs, investors. Why are they in those particular jurisdictions? Why are they corporate in those particular jurisdictions, particularly LLCs or C corps? Why are they in that particular jurisdiction? So let's just talk about, starting out with this Delaware state, old school state, a state that, when you look across the board, they pride themselves on having some of the most registered corporations in the United States in one state, having one of the oldest states to even recognize corporations in its state, and in turn allowing corporations to be set up there and the owners to not be subject to being resident there as well. One of the original states that allow people to set up corporations, whether it's LLCs or not, entities, and not live there. So we look at that. Delaware definitely is an old school state. It's close to the East Coast, close to DC. When you think about that particular jurisdiction, they're favorable for, they say, corporations. So when you look at the lawyers in that jurisdiction, you may find favorable lawyers. This is an old school wealthy state. So old school money is there, old money is there. So they're going to have a very embedded thought process of protecting money, protecting wealth. And that's why you see traditionally a lot of corporations are set up in this particular state. Now, if we say, oh, it's for privacy purposes, you don't have to disclose the owners. Well, clearly, this is just one of those states, once again, that allows states to actually do that, where you don't have to necessarily disclose specific owners. You can just have a registered agent, things of that nature. Now, we're not saying that that's particular to this state, but there are states where you don't have to disclose every style of owner, who is the owner. There's multiple forms of an owner. They have a lot of the states now utilize what's called a registered agent, which is someone in the state that can is available for suit and things of that nature. So you have your old school state. There was old school Delaware. So let's hop into like what's the cup of tea of the day, what's not the cup of tea of the day. The cup of tea of the day is your Montanas, your Wyomings, maybe a Utah. You know, why do you want to go to these places? Oh, the registration and renewal fee are minimal. They require less things. When you look at Wyoming has been a crypto state almost, where you see them encouraging people to come in with, you know, they've actually started trying to give people banking licenses and stuff like that in that state. So when you look at this state, people say, "Oh, is it friendly for this state or is it not friendly for that state?" Clearly, Wyoming has. If you Google anything around them in crypto, they're trying to become what's called a pioneer in this particular jurisdiction with those style of entities being registered there. And particularly, you can talk about these Wyoming entities, whether they're corporations, whether they're financial institutions. That is what their cup of tea of the day out there is promoting, that type of deal. But when you see that in a Montana, or you see that, and not necessarily Nebraska, but you see, a Utah possibly. When you see those, you see they kind of have had loose and encouraging laws for free enterprise, as they would call it. That's just how that goes. More like we say, one of the states is participating in encouraging this crypto, not we're going to call it fiasco, but wanting to make sure that if there are going to be regulations in place, they want to make sure that they're putting that regulation in place to where, if there's any type of financial operation, they can make sure that uh, they have some regulation around it, which is important if you are going to allow it in the first place. So let's just move over to Nevada. Nevada, old school state. We don't want to call it criminal. I'm sure they would like their state to be branded as uh, a free enterprise state as well, if you all would like to believe that. Nevada's an old school state. You would like to think that this is one of the states that is somehow is an old school New York. Now, New York is fairly modern still, has kept with the times, powerhouse in finance, econ, traveling around the world doing business, people wanting to go to New York. Nevada is supposed to be a vacation spot. Somehow it has one of the largest entertainment segments in the United States. And once again, how many people do you hear becoming billionaires out of there as opposed to millionaires out of there? Once again, tourist jurisdiction. Once again, when you look at Nevada, most people do not look at Nevada and say, "Oh, this is a super business state." They do not. But when it comes down to it, brass tacks and nails, this is a state that has made it a point to ensure privacy at various different levels, on a corporate level, on a personal level, and it's almost one of those states that if they had no income tax, it would be one of those states. If it was a no income tax state around, which is not too many left in the union, Nevada could almost be one of those states. But clearly they're going to tax their population because it's actually a very well off jurisdiction. A lot of people may not want to hear that. A lot of people may not want to believe that. But it's like saying, well, what state is not favorable towards corporatocracy? This is one of those states that when you look at the enterprise of the state, entertainment, very successful in the states, nationally and internationally. So why would corporations be registered in Nevada and these other few states that we're talking about? Because they understand privacy. They don't need you to know that they're the richest companies in the world. That's a fact. So then we move over to, they say, some of the best states to register a corporation. We remember back in the day when Florida used to be one of those states where you would do that because a lot of people would say, oh, it's no personal income tax, and then the corporations, you have to deal with a corporate. They felt it was favorable towards the corporate. And you may or may not see that depending on where you are. Now, this is another thing. A lot of people will say, oh, do you have to live in a state that the corporation that you're managing is in? That's the questions people ask. Do I have to live in a state that I manage the entity in? This is the question. Do the corporate officers have to live in the state where the company's located? These are the advantages that when you can think outside of the box, when you understand the advantages of what we're talking about here, why go set up in those particular jurisdictions? Oh, I don't need to worry about the disadvantages of one jurisdiction or the next. Well, one's favorable towards certain styles of entities. Wouldn't it be favorable to be in those jurisdictions? So let's talk about it. It's not too many states outside of that that you see, you know, favorable outcomes as more of the cup of tea of the day, actually, when you look at, like, let's just say for example we move into the trusteeship thought process. Oh, we're going to be in trusteeship. Everyone would like to say, oh, Illinois was supposed to be a land trust state, Florida was supposed to be a land trust state. Well, okay, if Massachusetts, which is one of the oldest states, is favorable towards trust in general, not just land trust. Wouldn't that be considered a land trust state? But no, they don't want to call it that in the public. So what do? They just state it as, oh, these are the two cup of tea of the day. Don't really know about anything else. Whereas if this is one of the older states and it is built off of trust concepts, why would it not embody that throughout its principle to the day? And it actually does. So what is Massachusetts unfavorable towards trusteeship? Actually, it's not. It is favorable towards trusteeship. So it's interesting to see, oh, well, what state should I be set up in, or what state should you not be set up in? When we talk about set up in, we're talking about look at the states that are favorable for the style of entity that you're talking about. We remember there were states back in the day that cost $300 to $600 to start a corporation. So how do we look at this thought process of, well, what states do I want to stay away from, Trust Christian and Vault? Well, you really just it boils down brass tacks and nails to what state is the corporate tax the highest actually. What state is, when you start looking into the states, all you gotta do is ask an attorney outside of the current state you're in, what has the highest corporate taxes, and just kind of, almost avoid them if you could, indirectly. If you do live in that jurisdiction, then you'll deal with it. But once again, the reason why you're looking at different jurisdictions is for many reasons. One of the reasons could be privacy of the ownership and allowance of it. One of it could be, second thing could be, having favorable lawyers in that particular jurisdiction. Because when you have lawyers in that jurisdiction that are very familiar and able to address those issues, that may or may not come up in that particular state, and someone that has a lot of years of experience in that particular state for knowing how to deal with entities in that state if any issues arise, or how they manage property in that state or assets in that state, or how they deal with liabilities in that state versus other states. You got to find someone that has that conversation traditionally over at least 15 to 20 years of experience in that state. Of course, there's unfavorable jurisdictions just by the liabilities of the state, making you disclose certain things, making liabilities be higher in certain areas. Obviously, you got to remember you're starting an entity that utilizes state law. Not every corporation is created equal. Not every LLC is created equal. Not every C corp is created equal. Not every state is created equal. So when you start looking at what state is going to be more favorable or less favorable, you definitely want to have a good idea, or a general idea of, okay, this is a good state. Some people say, oh, is do I have to do the state I live in? That's the question for you to ask your attorney, and or the attorneys that you know. Do I have to do it? And they're not going to say you have to do it. It's not about have to do it. Is it favorable for who? For the system? For the corporation? Is it favorable for the state? Is it favorable for the attorney? Who's it favorable for? There are quite a few states you just stay away from. Hard-working blue-collar states. These are states that they don't make it look easy on you. Corporations are in corporations. You got to remember that's like saying, can you start a corporation, or can you create an entity in another country? Of course you can. if you live in the free states. You can do that. It's just there are liabilities incumbent with these things. So that's why it's great to have an attorney in those jurisdictions, so you can talk about those things and germane to that jurisdiction, nothing else. Not going off the handle talking about things that are irrelevant. You're actually talking about things germane to that particular jurisdiction. Oh man. So, there's another state that has no personal income tax. It's like asking people, well, why don't you go use your personal residence to move to another place? Everybody wants to do Airbnb and all these different things. Well, there are favorable states for income tax purposes if you're in those jurisdictions. Personally, but oh no, when we talked to a potential trustee the other day and they say, oh wow, I live here, but I was actually thinking about moving my residence to another area because I wanted to get a second place and I was just going to call that my first residence from now on. I'll travel back and forth to there. Exactly. But then you got your accountants and lawyers saying, why don't you take a salary? Why don't you become personally tax liable? Well, if you're going to move to a income tax free state, what are they talking about? They're blowing smoke. That's what they're doing. They're really just getting your money. That's what they're doing. Oh, you got to make sure that you have a salary. You got to make sure you're taking down a salary. So when you go to a income free state, how does that affect you now? How does that affect the company when the company's in another place now? Do they know how to mitigate that risk? Can they tell you that that's illegal? Oh, you have a second residence, you turn it to your first residence, you move to a different area, but now you're gonna move. Now you're gonna have the company where you really are at, and you're gonna have a residence that's where you say you're at on paper. No one wants to say that in the public, but that's what they're doing. Oh, I didn't know I could move to another state. Or oh, I didn't. My accountant didn't suggest it. My lawyer didn't suggest it. But then when I bring it to them, they didn't say much about it. They just concurred. Right. Well, how are you going to pay for stuff in a no income tax state if you have a residence there? Right. So when you really look at, there are quite a few things that are just going to be unfavorable. But when you look across the board, there are things that are favorable. It's not many that are favorable nowadays because the variance in the tax liability ultimately and the disclosure, whose names has to be disclosed. When you look at those states that we named, we're not showing favor to them. We're just letting you know those are states traditionally that we've heard as of recent that people look at and they say, hey, let me share this with people. Let me look at this with people. Let me work with people. What do you mean? We got people that are in the high net worth investor section talking about they're over here doing with stuff in Nevada. Oh man, well we're doing this, that, and the third, and they're international. They're Swiss, and they say, oh man, well we're gonna do this and that. And they're like, man, please. There's not much protection when you're in the public. So we're gonna go ahead and tell you that off at the end of it. That's how that goes. Because what they try to do is these guys that are international or whoever, people that look at this information, and they're doing. We know what purposes they're doing it for. Partially, even when you talk about disclosure purposes, when you talk about international clients, international people, they want to come into the states, they want to operate privately. Of course, they've gone through Nevada. They try to protect their privacy through Nevada. There's nothing wrong with that. This is the favor that they provide there, but let's not be, oh man, we don't know if Nevada's a hot state. Well, it's like saying it's Delaware old school. Of course, those are your two old school. Those are, oh, those are like the Caribbean island of the United States. Oh, aren't those tax havens? Isn't that what they say? Oh, aren't those tax havens? So this is how you know that when foreigners come into the United States, they know what states to go to. That's how you know. They know what states to go to when they're going out to the Midwest, or if they know they're going to go, hey, let's start a company in Delaware. Who is selling shell corps to these Asian companies? Who is selling those shell corps to them? What state? were they predominantly in? And still to this day, you can see it. A lot of foreign companies set up over in Nevada. Is it bad? Look, Nevada doesn't find it to be bad, so clearly it's not bad. But at the end of the day, that's not. It's like, well, why would they be doing it as opposed to you? It's a free market. You can open up wherever. Oh, do I have to open up where I live? Clearly, other companies from other countries are doing so. Other people are doing so. Of course they are. Of course they are. It is what it is. It's not. It's just, hey, what are the advantages? Have you talked when you think about it? Oh, everybody says, "Oh, I want to open up a company." Okay, when you open up a company, did you ask the accountant or the lawyer, hey, what would be a good state or the best state from your opinion? Now you think about this. When you go to those websites and you go open up a company, do you get to ask those questions to an attorney? Hey, what's the advantages of this state over this state? What's the advantages? What's the disadvantages? Appreciate you for tuning in live, listen, replay. Always appreciate everybody for tuning in live, listen, replay. This is the Vault, episode 460. What state is the best state to open up an LLC? Open up an LLC. And appreciate Texas for tuning in live, listen, replay. Always appreciate Texas for tuning in live, and tuning in the replay. What state is the best state to open an LLC? Well, you got to ask your attorneys. You think about it. Oh, just like you get three doctors' opinions, well, get three legal opinions for your state situation, because this is the situation that you're running into. Is it a liability situation? It says limited liability company, correct? LLC, limited liability corporation, limited liability, right? Right. Well, not every state is equal when it comes to distributing the liability. Not every state is equal in that. So let's go ahead and make sure hey, you start out the year right. Hey, what state? If you want to reach out to Trust Christian and Vault, you say, well, what state really is the best state? Really, it just depends on what your needs are, what you're willing to manage. That's what it really comes down to. Each state has its own, requirements for filings, for renewals. If you are going to renew, they are going to ask for certain disclosures and things like that. You do pretty much got to be state compliant with the company. That's very important. You got to be state compliant, with the operating agreement and things of that nature. So those are things that you're going to have to look into when it comes to the state. So appreciate everybody for tuning in live, listening to replay. Always appreciate everybody that tunes in live, listening to replay. 460. What state is the best option to open an LLC? Once again, it's not necessarily that it's not one state. There's many different ones. Even if you live in a state and you're like, hey, I want to open it up where I live, we're sure most attorneys are going to tell you, hey, yeah, do it where you live at. Yep. And ask them, is it wise or is it okay? Is it legal to open it up in another one? Can you do it in another country? Oh, it's going to cost more. Right. It is going to cost more. You're going to have to find competency in another jurisdiction, of course. But at the end of the day, how much is opportunity cost loss where you actually now have more capital at your disposal? That's the difference. Having more capital at your disposal, having greater protections. Think about it. Why would your attorney or would your attorney suggest that you go into an entity that's favorable in that state or in another state? Those are the questions you have to ask yourself. Christian at trustchristian.com for trustee training or consultation. Christian at trustchristian.com. Look forward to hearing from you all. Peace and joy.